Hello, welcome to Jason the Old Millennial. My name is Jason. I'm speaking to you here in my basement in the great state of Kansas. And making a video today, just kind of my thoughts on the Beatles. Of course, we just had I've been talking about the Get Back documentary, which was a big event that happened recently. And I don't know, just been thinking about the Beatles a lot, which I think about the Beatles a lot anyways. They're probably the group, one of the subjects I think about a lot and read and search and analyze, contemplate. But definitely more lately because of the whole Beatles Get Back documentary, and I've been watching so many YouTube videos on other people reacting to it. So it's been interesting seeing all these different viewpoints and so forth. But I also want to say, of course, a couple of big things happened historically this last week. December 7th, we had the 80th anniversary of Pearl Harbor. Obviously one of the biggest events in American history. And then December 8th, I believe, was like the anniversary of John Lennon, his death in 1980. So we're going on 41 years now since his death. And so that's a big, of course, historical moment for the Beatles and for music, and one of the saddest moments in history. And so we got that going along with like I said, all this other Beatles stuff coming out. And so yeah, a lot of stuff to think about when it comes to the Beatles. Also, I got to do jury duty this last week, Monday the 5th or 6th. Except I went to I've gotten jury duty notices, but I never actually had to go to the place to do jury duty. So this is the first time I actually had to go to the courthouse. And got my jury sticker on and had to, get a book about what to do as a juror, what are the rules, and, sat there for an hour and 15 minutes waiting to get in the courthouse. And then we finally get in the courthouse, and then the judge says that they did a plea bargain, so there's no trial. So our civic duty is done. We don't have to do anything anymore. We get to go home, all that. So that was interesting, getting to do that. I still kind of was hoping for my, big moment though in the court. Like Stamps like, you can't handle the truth. Obviously, they would just kick me out of the court and maybe go to jail because jury member can't do that. But I always think of these dramatic court moments that I could have had, but never got to do. Could have had the 12 Angry Man moment, fighting against the other jurors for justice for this person. Who knows? But didn't get my moment, so that's all right. Maybe next time. Also, this Saturday is my grandma's 95th birthday, or Friday, I think it's my grandma's 95th birthday, so, incredible. So happy she's had such a long life so far, and it keeps going, and really happy for grandma and for what's going on there. And we're going to have a good celebration this weekend for her. Anyway, so, yeah, a lot going on this week, but I just thought I'd do this video just kind of talk about some random thoughts I've been thinking about the Beatles, I guess, which I do a lot, but it'd just be interesting to kind of say out loud my thoughts, I guess, on video, I thought. And about the Get Back documentary, thinking about that and how it was really the end of the Beatles. The Beatles obviously were going to break up pretty soon after that point. And you watch a documentary and it almost feels like, I don't know, there wasn't so much excitement about being a Beatle. It felt like to me like it was old hat at that point. They've been the Beatles for a while at that point, the last decade or so. And so watching it, it just felt like, yeah, they were ready to be done with the Beatles, I guess was my take. One of my big takes of watching that whole documentary was like, I was kind of thinking, you know what, they probably were ready to go move on to something different. They just can't sustain, a group like that. It just can't sustain forever. And they accomplished so much in such a small amount of time. I mean, it's incredible what they've done. And they all had different interests that they wanted to accomplish that they couldn't accomplish as a group. So to me, it's like, I definitely understand that it was probably a good thing. I don't know if that's the right word to say, but it's kind of a good thing that they broke up because they really needed to venture off on their own and do their own interests because once you're in a band like the Beatles, I mean, one person does something, it affects the others. So I think John especially, there's so much stuff that he wanted to do, but he couldn't do because he knew it was going to affect the other Beatles. And so I think, especially for him, definitely need to go off and do his own thing. I feel like the one person that really wanted to stay with the Beatles was Paul. I think Paul could have been a Beatle for life, and he would have been totally happy. He loved making music with the other three, and experimenting and changing music, the industry, and doing new things. I think that was his thing, and he just loved being. I mean, because they were just doing amazing things in that group. I think he was okay with doing that, just continue doing amazing things. Compared to the other ones, I think George definitely was ready to move on. I think Ringo probably would have been okay with being a Beatle also for a long time. I mean, he didn't really have a lot more going on, I think, than being the drummer of the Beatles, and he wasn't a singer-songwriter himself, so he really didn't have necessarily a future, though he did end up making music after the Beatles and had some success there. So, but I mean, I think he was fine. Of course, Ringo's like the one guy that got along with all three. I think he's the only one that got along with everybody and played on everybody else's albums and stuff. So it's kind of always significant thing about Ringo. Anyway, like I said, these are random thoughts. So yeah, they probably should have broken up. Because I'm thinking, what more could the Beatles have done? I mean, I feel like by 1970, they've accomplished everything they could in the music industry. They've done everything. I mean, more than any other band. And I think in that band, what are your goals? I think they're always trying to think of new things. What's something new that they could do? And I don't know if there's a point where the Beatles just like, there's nothing more we can do. There's nothing new to discover, to conquer. We've done everything. We've conquered everything. We're the number one band for 8 years by far. Nobody seems to be even close to us. We're the champions, and you get maybe tired and bored of that, being at top all the time, and kind of felt like we need to move on and do something different because it's just the same thing. And you never want to continue doing the same thing, I think, especially for the Beatles. And so you think about the Beatles and that point in their life. Of course, they're all getting married and having kids, so they're definitely growing up and still in their like late 20s, mid 20s, whatever. So still young, still have a lot left to do in their lives, but already did so much. Obviously, most famous people in the world, multimillionaires, all that, top of their industry that they can do. And you think about the Beatles, I mean, I think really John was the one that really kind of broke with the Beatles, from what I understand, from what I read and stuff. I know Paul was the first one to talk about it, just because he was asked about it. But I think he definitely wasn't the one that wanted to leave. I think John definitely was the one, I believe, that really wanted to leave, because he was more interested in being with Yoko and doing their thing than being with the Beatles. I think he was tired of being with the Beatles at that point, for sure. Like I said, George was ready to move on too, so I'm sure once John wanted to leave, George was willing to leave too. And I think Paul was the one that was kind of devastated that they wanted to leave, and he wanted to continue being the Beatles at that point. Because I believe I read something about like they're at a meeting and Paul's talking about the next thing for the Beatles to do, and John said something like, "Are you crazy? We're done with," basically. I think something like, "Are you deaf? Or are you daft? Or whatever? We're not, we're broken up now. We're not going to be the Beatles anymore." And it was kind of this reality that it seems like everybody realized except for Paul, and so it hit Paul pretty hard. Like he didn't realize the Beatles were officially over, but it felt like at that point, yeah, the Beatles are officially over as a group. And I believe they still had Let It Be, still hadn't come out as an album. They did Abbey Roads right after Let It Be, and Abbey Roads came out, and then I think they broke up, and they still had to wait for Let It Be to come out as an album. So they still had their last album even after the breakup, which was interesting. And they're all working on their solo projects at that moment, so their last album had to kind of compete with their solo project at the same time. All that was going on. Anyway, so I think about looking back at the Beatles' career and what were their goals starting out and what were their accomplishments going on. And I think when you think about it, pretty interesting looking at, like I said, once you get from 1962 especially to 1970, like I said, look at what they accomplished. What more could they? I mean, that's a question, like really, what more could they have done? I wonder a lot, what more could the Beatles have done if they stayed together? What could they accomplish that they didn't accomplish before? Is there anything new that they could have done? I don't know. If there is, I'd be interested in anybody telling me, because there possibly could have been. I just don't know. I think a lot about like, it started out as the Quarrymen. With John kind of started this group with his other friends. Though the other friends I don't think were into the group as much as John. It was really John's idea. And I don't know what John's goal was at the time. I don't know if that he thought he could make money as a musician. I'm sure he would have taken it for sure. He would love to make money, but it might have been more of just it was kind of thing to be cool. It was fun to play in front of an audience. I think once you play in front of an audience and you get kind of that thrill, there's something about it that's really addicting, getting the reaction of a crowd. So I'm sure that probably was part of it. He loved being in front of a crowd, entertaining a crowd. It was really fun. And so he's had fun doing that, and of course covering songs of musicians that he loved. And so all that was probably just a lot of fun, besides hanging out with the band. And then obviously hooking up with chicks. I mean, that's what every guy wants to do. Every guy wants to get in a band so they can, get a lot of good-looking women. So I'm sure that was in John's mind, that he can get a lot of women that way. And that definitely helped for sure. And probably making some money too was probably on his mind, but I don't know if there was enough there that he thought he can have a career. Anyway, so then, Paul McCartney joins in, and now you got a second musician that's just as good. And then you get George later on, and that's really the Beatles. When you get Paul, John, and George, that is basically the beginning of the Beatles to me. They aren't the Quarrymen anymore. The other Quarrymen, they leave because they're like, we're not going to be professional musicians. We're not making money this way. We're going to get, real jobs, go to school, whatever. We got other things that we want to do, and this isn't just a hobby. Really, for John, Paul, and George at that point, it was more than just a hobby, but just kind of something they really wanted to do. Though I think at the time, I can't imagine they sounded that great. I mean, they were still learning guitar chords at that point, and they're sort of, learning how to do guitar solos and, all that. And they had probably cheap guitars at that point. And so I don't know how good their sound was at that point or what they thought they could accomplish. And they weren't songwriting really. Maybe they were doing some songwriting, but they weren't, obviously, hit songs at that point because they were just starting out. But then it was really when they got to Hamburg, they were I felt like they were kind of at the right place at the right time. The Hamburg wanted British rock bands, so they were able to get a deal to go to Hamburg and play in the clubs. Of course, they added Pete Best for drummer and Stu Sutcliffe for bass player. Even though Sutcliffe really wasn't a musician, they just needed a bass player, and Pete Best was just the best drummer they can get at the point. I don't know if that was like the drummer they wanted, but they needed a drummer, and Pete Best was good enough to get them where they wanted to go, so they added him there. And it really was when Hamburg, I think they really kind of felt like they could maybe make a career out of being musicians. I think that was their goal at that point, was like, hey, I think we're good enough. I mean, they played tons and tons of hours at the Hamburg clubs all night. And I think at that point they felt like maybe we're good enough, we can make some money at this, we don't have to get jobs. I always felt like the goal of every musician is to not have to get a real job, which I can totally understand. I wish I didn't have to get a real job. That would be fun, not having to go to work 12 hours a day, 8 hours a day, all that. But, that's most of us have to go out and get jobs and do hard labor and all that. But I think their idea was like, let's just play music, make money, and not have to go out and get jobs. And that was their goal. Let's make enough money that we can survive, And so when they came back from Hamburg, and they even did some recordings with Tony Sheridan, I believe, there. So I think that helped them make them think that they could make some money at it. So when they came back, they were playing at, the Cavern, the Casbah. I think they're making enough money that they felt like, hey, we can make money at this and survive being musicians. At the same point, I don't know if it's, like I said, I don't know what their goals were exactly, like getting a record deal. I think definitely I was on their minds, like it'd be such a fantastic dream or goal to get a record deal, that's kind of, almost unheard of. But at that point, it was like, man, if we could, get a record deal, make records, that would be so awesome. Of course, they meet Brian Epstein, and he helps them go get a record deal with EMI and George Martin. And so once they go and get the record deal, it was like, oh my gosh, this was, that was kind of an accomplishment, huge accomplishment in their career. And we're only talking 1962. They're really probably, as far as they're concerned, they thought, well, maybe we get a record deal, but they never thought they'd be the biggest band in the world, maybe necessarily, but that was enough for them probably just to get a record deal and make money making music is all they really wanted to do. But then once they got to there, it was like, now the goal is, let's come out with a number one song, let's come out with a record, a number one record. So of course they come out, Please Please Me, number one UK, Please Please Me album, number one UK. So now not only they have accomplished getting a record deal, now they've got a number one single, number one album. They're one of the top bands. Well, they go from being basically the top band in Liverpool to now being one of the top bands in England, in the country. So, I mean, you think about this. I guess I'm saying all this to talk about, like, interesting to think about what were their small goals at first, and how did they expand those goals with each year. Those goals were continuing to expand because they were continually to accomplish their goals at such a quick manner. I mean, it's just a very quick way. All of a sudden, they go from this great, the best band in Liverpool to being the best band in England. And then by 1964, we're going to be the best band in the world. I mean, I feel like in 2 years, you go from this, I can't imagine watching them in Liverpool, and then 2 years later, it's like, this is the best band in the world. I mean, I don't know if any of the bands ever accomplished that in such a quick time period. Maybe you look at Elvis, I don't know if even he did that, or Buddy Holly or anybody like that, but maybe you can compare it to some of those. But I mean, I think it's amazing that the Beatles, we're like, all right, we're just gonna, once we got one number one song and they wrote it, so then they're like, hey, let's continue to write, see if we can come up with normal. I mean, the goal was just let's get more number one singles out there, or hit singles, let's get more hit albums, number one albums, which they did. Every album was number one. They were always constantly coming out with number one singles, one after another. So I mean, they were just, everything their goals were, they were just hitting. And then it was like, and then I know they went to Europe, and they went to, I think, France and Holland, and they toured there. And so now they're touring England, they're touring different Europeans. So it's like, oh, now we're this hit touring band. I mean, it's all you want as musicians, is have big crowds when you go tour and do concerts, and have albums and singles that do well. So I mean, they're hitting all of this. And then it was like, all right, what haven't we done yet? Well, we haven't had a number one single in America, and no British band has ever had a number one single in America. So that was quite an accomplishment to say, like, let's be the first band, British band, to have a hit song and hit record in America, and also go on a tour that's, sell out, concerts, and something that's never been done before. And so they worked on that, and the next thing you know, they got a number one single, and I Want to Hold Your Hand. And then they go in February 9th, I believe, 1964, they go to Ed Sullivan Theater, playing in America, first time they play in America. Of course, it's like the biggest viewing of all time. I mean, the numbers of viewers are huge. Of course, the crowd is going crazy. Women are screaming. It was just, one of the biggest, most important music events in history. It's Beatles playing at Sullivan Theater. I mean, it changes music. I feel like at that point, they're totally just changed music in the world. I mean, United States and Europe especially, I guess. They've totally just changed the music industry. I mean, and we're talking just 2 years into them, not just being a band, but I mean, 2 years of them with EMI and having a record contract. I mean, they're the best band in the world, and they've changed the music industry. I mean, how many bands change the music industry? Or musicians? I mean, you maybe Elvis, maybe you look at Buddy Holly, a lot of those 50 greats, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Ray Charles. I don't know. You look at them maybe changing stuff, but not at the level that the Beatles were changing the music industry. And I was thinking about how not only did they change the music, which that probably wasn't a goal of theirs, but they did it. They didn't say, we're going to change music forever. They just wanted to be, the biggest band. They were the biggest band in Europe. Now we want to be the biggest band in America, which once you're the biggest band in America, you're basically the biggest band in the world. So it's like, once we get that, I mean, what more can you do, it seems like? Though they definitely were still evolving and changing at that point. Being the biggest band in America and going on tour there and sell out crowds and number one singles after number one singles. And I was going to say, and then you definitely, one of the things, I mean, how many groups of musicians have started so many careers? I mean, they just started so many careers. The British Invasion comes in, and that only comes in because of the Beatles. All of a sudden, groups, and if you're a rock group in Great Britain, you're getting record contracts like crazy because now they're looking for the next Beatles. It's like a trend that they're like, okay, it's trending towards British bands. Let's get some British bands here. So all of a sudden, a bunch of British bands are coming to America and being very successful, which would only happen because of the Beatles. If it wasn't for the Beatles, we wouldn't have this explosion of British talent coming in. Like the Hollies, the Who, Led Zeppelin, Rolling Stones, the Kinks. I think some of the big ones I'm thinking of that make it big here in America. So I don't know how many groups or bands have started so many careers like the Beatles. Thanks to the Beatles, so many careers started. I think even the American folk rock movement started because of the Beatles. The Byrds basically started the folk rock movement. And they were folk musicians who then heard the Beatles and was like, man, this is, groundbreaking, so they started changing they started implementing what they heard from the Beatles with what they're hearing from Bob Dylan. So it was this combination of Bob Dylan and the Beatles, and that kind of created the folk rock genre, which we got the Byrds, Buffalo Springfield, Association, the Turtles, Loving Spoonful. I think Simon Garfunkel, I think it all kind of in that genre, and eventually Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and all that. So that's kind of the base of the folk rock genre. So they all come in and have success. So none of them probably would have had success if it wasn't for the Beatles either. So the Beatles are successful for the British invasion and for the folk rock genre, in my opinion. So anyway, just say that it's crazy what they were able to accomplish in such a short time. Anyway, so they did that. So then it's like, what else do we do? Hey, let's make a movie. Elvis made a bunch of movies. Let's be like Elvis. There's no other, I don't know any other, besides Elvis, who else makes movies as a rock band? And no rock band or British rock band makes movies, I don't believe. And so all of a sudden now we got the chance to make a movie. Now they're acting in a movie. It's something they probably didn't think about. Like I said, in 1962, that we wanted to star in our own movie, a hit movie, But at that point, it's like, okay, we're accomplished so much. What else can we do? Well, we're going to do a movie, which was successful, Hard Day's Night. And so, so now they're famous actors. They're also accomplishing the music or the movie industry besides the music industry. So now they're going to a different industry altogether and conquering that industry, it seems like. So they go do that. And then you get to 1965, and of course you do another movie, Help. I think they're kind of bored with movies at that point. They're contracted to do like 4, but I think they're already by Help. They're like, okay, we're kind of done doing movies. Like it was kind of fun to do for the first time, but now it's like it's kind of boring. Anyways, but they do Help, and that was a huge hit. Or I think it was. I don't know how huge, but I'm sure fairly successful. Album was really good. Anyways, that's what I was thinking about. But then you get 1965, and then you're like, still doing tours. But yeah, I think touring's getting a little boring. Like I said, they're getting tired of course, the constant traveling, all the screaming fans. They can't hear themselves when they sing. There's all that stuff. So touring they're still doing it, but it was getting a little like, kind of get done with that at that point. But, and then they wanted to, I think, of course, in 1995, they were kind of wanting to change their sound. They were kind of at that point, okay, we've accomplished everything we can with the pop rock, catchy songs, love songs. We've done that. Let's expand what we're doing with music, musically, but lyrically. Of course, influenced by Bob Dylan. And so you come up with the Rubber Soul, which is like you're adding. The guitar's a little heavier, the bass a little heavier. The bass work is amazing. Paul's bass work just goes to another level with Rubber Soul. So you get Rubber Soul, and like this, it sounds a little different. They kind of, and what makes me amazed is like a lot of bands they say, all right, we're making this catchy pop rock tunes. We're being very successful at it. We're making lots of money. Albums are doing well. Let's continue doing it. I think a lot of bands don't really want to change. They want to just keep doing what's making them money. But the Beatles were like, okay, we've done that, but let's, write songs like In My Life and, more self-reflecting songs. more deeper songs, deeper lyrics, not just love songs, but sad songs. Nowhere Man, Norwegian Wood. I mean, some songs that don't really make sense necessarily, or what we don't know what it's about, but it's very interesting what we're doing with it. And so I don't know, it's a completely different kind of album, but they spent so much time in the studio on that album that they were able to make one of the best albums ever, and best album up to that date for sure. And you get the Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys hears that album and says, "Oh my gosh, this is a groundbreaking album. I want to do something like that." So then he goes off to try to make the greatest album, try to compete. Now we got a competitor with the Beatles, Brian Wilson, the Beach Boys. Though the other Beach Boys, I don't think were as excited about trying to change their sound, because again, their sound was doing very well. Why change it? But I think Brian was trying to push them to evolve like the Beatles were, and to do more studio work. The Beach Boys were still touring, but Brian Wilson stopped touring at that point. He was like, I'm just going to concentrate on writing the songs and doing something different, writing some different type of songs for the Beach Boys. And it's not just about surfing or about cars, but something deeper. And we're going to do more sound effects in the studio, more horns and orchestra, and we're going to put so much different music in it that we'd never done before. Anyway, so he had this big idea, and so he does Pet Sounds. Pet Sounds, what I understand, isn't exactly it wasn't exactly successful at the time. Then now looking back, it's one of the biggest albums of all time. I said it's a groundbreaking album that everybody agrees on. It's always really high on everybody's lists, including my own. I love that album, the Pet Sounds. So he was able to accomplish what he wanted to do, and make something different, evolve from the Beach Boys, and kind of compete with the Beatles on making one of the greatest albums of all time. So I mean, Rubber Soul, like I said, definitely changed the music industry again. And like I said, like with the Beach Boys and other groups who were trying to compete with them and do more studio work. You kind of got this idea that we don't need to make music just for concerts, but we can make movie that's just for the studio, which I think was a new idea and concept. I might be wrong, but as far as I can tell, that was like a new thing that the Beatles were doing. Like, let's make music just for the studio and not make music. Before, they were just making music that would be great in big crowds. But now it's like, let's make music that we can't do live, that we can only do in the studio, which I think was a new idea. And continues on this idea that I have, that they didn't want to stay the same. They want to keep evolving. They kept coming up with new goals. Here's new things that we can do that no one's ever done before. And that's what kept them going as a group, I think. Let's keep doing more and more. I think I'm going to close this video at this point, and then start on the next one, kind of starting off where I stopped here, since I'm going a little long, almost 30 minutes. So anyway, so this is almost like a part one of my random thoughts on the Beatles. But thank you for watching it and liking the video, and thank you to subscribers, and I just really appreciate you all. Have a good day.